So why a wine section? Why not a beer section? I mean, beer is just as sophisticated as wine. Some say it's healthier. It is harder to produce. And not to take anything away from the wine guys, but have you ever heard a brewer say they had a bad year? So you want to know why they say beer is healthier than wine, or how it helped save lives during the plague, and a little science and history about the beer industry that nearly died but was reborn right here in Northern California? It's all on tap. Beer. It's literally as old as civilization, possibly 10,000 years old. First recipe ever written was for beer, and historians actually believe beer changed the course of history as Neolithic people stopped their wandering lifestyles to grow grain for beer. Today there are dozens of styles of beers and countless varieties.
You have your India ale, your brown ale, your pale ale, your oatmeal stout, your...
Okay, Wendy, all right, I get it, but what about this? How come everybody seems to think that all beers taste like this? There are a few good reasons. A little history.
Prohibition. In 1920, the 18th Amendment made intoxicating liquor illegal in America. But after 13 years of listening to their angry constituents, politicians ratified the 21st Amendment, making it legal to drink once again. But it wouldn't be long before American beer entered its real dark ages.
Those dark ages happened right after World War II. You see, the country's highways got better. The brewing process got easier, which meant the big Midwest brewers could sell cheaply coast to coast, and that put nearly every small brewer out of business. So why is it that we have all these varieties today? Let's call it the craft beer revolution of the 1970s. Okay, let's quickly get something out of the way. There isn't anything wrong with the big guys. All brewers strive for consistency, and these guys do it better than anyone. Plus, American lager is so clear it doesn't mask flaws, so they have to be good. And who's to say what to like and what not to like? But variety is the spice of life. After 30 years of tasting relatively the same, in the late 1970s, American beer had a renaissance, and many played a role. There was Fred Eckert and his beer articles in the Oregonian, Jim Cook behind Sam Adams, Charlie Papazian and his guide on home brewing. Michael Jackson, the writer, not the singer, deserves a lot of credit too. His book, The World Guide to Beer, opened many a beer drinker's eyes to what they'd been missing during the Dark Ages. But the gears that brought back life to American beer began right here in Northern California at 3 distinct locations. And that story starts right here at Anchor Brewing. Anchor Brewing got its start in 1896. Now, they did go through some struggles throughout the years, going in and out of business a few times. But like all the other small brewers, the post-World War II Dark Ages hit Anchor hard, and by 1965, they were about to close for good. But in walks Fritz Maytag and the Maytag appliance family. The story goes like this. He walks into a bar in San Francisco's North Beach, sits down, orders the only beer on tap, which happens to be an Anchor. The owner walks by and says to him, "You better get that while you can, because Anchor is done." So, Fritz marches down to the brewery and ends up buying a majority stake in a company that at the time only had $128 in its bank account. So what were you thinking when you first took over, when you first bought the place and came inside?
I wasn't thinking. I was just kind of dreaming. Here was a little tiny local company, well known among a very few, in terrible financial trouble.
It didn't take very long to realize that there was a bad impression of the beer itself out in the local market, and that the beer was sour frequently.
We were the last medieval brewery in the world. We had no real modern technology, no real sanitation, no temperature control to speak of. We were medieval in that sense.
It took him a decade to get Anchor where he wanted it to be, a brewery known for the quality of beer, not the quantity. All right, Fritz, so here we go. I see a microscope right here in front of us, and I heard these stories of when you took over, you actually brought in your own microscope.
What happened was that I bought into the brewery. It was bankrupt. So I brought my microscope down to the brewery, got some serious books on brewing, and began to study what was really happening in our brewery. And I quickly learned that we had a medieval brewery. We had the last professional brewery in the world that knew nothing really about modern brewing science. No wonder I fell in love with the brewery, because I was the kind of guy who had a microscope. Brewing is science. Every brewery, whether they know it or not, is deeply indebted to the very early scientific explorers and thinkers. pH was invented in a brewery, one of the most early and powerful tools of chemical understanding. Thermometers were applied. Among the very first places that they were ever applied was breweries. The temperature is everything in brewing in terms of enzymes and yeast. Pure culture, which we take for granted today. The pharmaceutical companies, all kinds of companies just take it for granted that you can buy a bottle or a gallon or a tank truck of a pure bacteria or a pure yeast or a pure mold or a pure living organism. And all of that was invented in a brewery. It was one of the very first places that simple early scientific methods and instruments were applied. And the reason is that they made money. We were losing money selling sour beer. We got our microscope and things got better.
So much better that in just a few short years after taking ownership, Anchor was making 5 new styles, including the resurrection of steam beer. This is almost like a two-parter here, but you brought back steam beer, and why'd you do that? And also, what is steam beer?
Well, nobody knows what steam beer is. I like to say I'm the world's expert, and I don't know. When lager beer came in the 19th century, it really just swept the world. It depended on refrigeration. It was cool brewing. And all the old beers disappeared, except for a few places. Before they went away, there were several localities where the old beers got these nicknames. Common beer was one, quick brewed beer, and out here for some reason steam beer. We're trying to reproduce as much of the old-fashioned brewing as we can, pre-modern brewing, pre-lager brewing. We are all malt. Lots of hops, a copper brew kettle, which was certainly the tradition for many, many hundreds of years. Open fermenters, cooled only by the outside air, carbonated entirely by natural fermentation under pressure, sort of like champagne. All of these things are very old-fashioned, simple, but traditional things. What makes it unique is many, many traditional things all rolled into one, and us maintaining that as a theme, as a concept. It's just wonderful old-fashioned beer, that's all.
Now, not to take anything away from Anchor, but many say the grassroots aspect of the craft beer revolution began in Sonoma in 1976 at the New Albion Brewery. Taxi! Before I tell you how important New Albion was, let me tell you about this place right here, the brand new Napa Smith Brewery right here in Napa, California. It's so new, the doors, they've got nothing on them. Let's check it out. Back in the late 70s, when Don Barkley was still a brewing student at UC Davis, his professors thought he was nuts for shunning a career with the big guys in favor of wanting to make craft beer. But in the summer of '78, Don got his wish when he was hired at New Albion. New Albion is a big deal because it is hailed as America's first microbrewery. And here he is, Don Barkley. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Gary. How are you doing?
Very good. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Let's start out with Albion and
Yeah.
Tell us about the early days. You were there. What was it like back in the day?
Oh man, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, it was just wild because at the New Albion Brewing, we were doing something completely different. I had originally gone to University of California, Davis, and I went there and I talked to Dr. Michael Lewis and I said, where can I get some brewing experience? And of course he saw a beard and long hair and he said, your experience probably won't go anywhere. The first thing you need to do is cut your hair and then you can get a job in the brewing industry, because back in '77, I mean, that's where the brewing industry was. But I got to go to the New Albion Brewing Company and work with Jack McCall. So that was the very first microbrewery to open up in the United States. And boy, did we have a good time. I didn't get paid anything at all that first year.
I was going to ask you about that. How did that work? Just pretty much beer? You had to get paid at least beer.
I did get paid in beer. I'll have to tell you, I got 1 case of beer a week. But I got to drink as much as I could on the job. So that was pretty handy.
It wasn't always, Albion. It was also Mendocino and Red Tail Ale.
That's
Tell
right.
us a little bit about those as well.
That's right. Well, in 1983, the New Albion Brewing Company closed its doors. We jackhammered out the floor, and we moved all the brewing equipment up to the town of Hopland and the Mendocino Brewing Company. And that was the year that the Mendocino Brewing Company opened the very first brew pub in California. And we really started the beginning of a grand movement in the brewing industry. Now we can go to these various towns and you can stop in and check those local brew pubs out and try their local beer. And I think that we're at the beginning of that whole movement.
And I can see now how obviously you've kind of built that reputation. You've done those positive things. Tell us a little bit about this now. Napa Smith, it's something new. You got this thing rolling now, and they come to you. They come to Don Barkley. How does that make you feel?
Humble. I'll tell you, this was a great opportunity for me because the Napa Smith Brewing is a brand new facility. We have a variety of really good equipment here, and we have a great lab as well. So the Smith family was able to invest their money into a great facility.
What type of flavors do you have? Do you have a variety of beers so far, or just a couple?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Napa Smith Brewing Company right now has 3 beers, and we've only been on the market for about 2 months, and draft only yet, but we're getting ready to bring our bottles out here in the next month or so. But we have a pale ale, which is a nice, light, delicate pale ale, something that you can have with dinner. You can have a couple of beers and it enhances the whole experience. We also have a wonderful amber ale, which has 7 different varieties of malted barley in it, and then a wheat beer. That is a nice, light beer with a real refreshing finish and a nice, clear look to it. So we're really excited about all of our products.
And one thing that I think I've noticed here, you got all these really cool tanks here and a lot of things that you're building, but I don't think you could run one of these without having a really cool wagon.
Some people might call it a golf cart, but we call it our beer wagon. Oh, it's a delight.
Caught my eye right away.
Yeah, I bet it did. It's a cutie.
All right, back in those early days when you were at New Albion and, Mendocino, Red Tail, all that, how does that play into today with this place here, brand new, Napa Smith?
The craft brewing industry is still a family kind of business, and people really pay attention to that. And so that's one of the reasons the Napa Smith Brewing Company is great. It's a family that says, man, I want to make great beer.
New Albion closed its doors in 1983 and no doubt left a huge mark in American brewing history as the country's first craft brewery. Don was right about this thing. I'm taking it with me. The beer wagon. It holds a lot of beer.
And now another important moment in beer history. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signs a bill that leads to United States Code, Title 26, Subtitle E, Chapter 51, Subchapter A, Part 1, Subpart D, Section 5053, Subsection E.
Okay, what that meant was it's now legal to brew beer from your home, but that was the seed that led to arguably the biggest craft brewery success in America, Sierra Nevada. The brewery's owner and founder, Ken Grossman, actually got his start as a home brewer in the late 70s in Chico, California. But in 1980, Ken and his business partner, Paul Camusi, bottled the first batch of ale behind the famous green label we know today. So fast forward some 30 years, and Sierra Nevada is one of the most respected brands on the market today. Ken Grossman, owner, founder of Sierra Nevada, how you doing?
Good.
First off, I got to ask you this. I'm looking around. I see the place looks beautiful. It's gorgeous, but I'm guessing it probably wasn't always like this. Tell me about the earlier days when you first got going.
Well, back when I started in the late 70s thinking about building a brewery, there were no places you could buy brewing equipment. So everything we started out with was home built. So I spent quite a bit of time scrounging junkyards and dairies and soft drink plants throughout the West Coast looking for parts and pieces to assemble a brewery. Back when I started, my goal was to produce 3,000 barrels of beer a year. That was what my business plan called for. And then as we started to grow, we realized that there really wasn't enough money to be made at 3,000 barrels a year, so we continued to expand. And I remember at one point I was quoted as saying, if I could only get to 12,000 barrels, I'd be happy. And today we produce that in just a few days.
Following their self-imposed rule of letting the beer speak for itself, Sierra Nevada has never advertised, and yet pale ale still became a huge success.
Well, when we started, we really focused on trying to create a beer that had a real personality and distinctive presence compared to the other beers that were on the marketplace. So we chose American aroma hops. Before that, most American beers really didn't have a real distinctive hop character or hop note to them. So that was one of the things that set us apart.
Another aspect setting them apart has been their effort to reduce the brewery's impact on the environment.
Today we do a whole lot of innovative things. We have our own water treatment plant that produces methane as a byproduct, and that methane is fed to a bank of fuel cells where we turn that methane into electricity. We also have a very large solar array. We'll have over 10,000 panels installed here by the end of this year. One of the larger solar arrays in the country, actually, and I think in the world that's privately owned.
That electricity helps power not only the brewery, but also their extremely successful restaurant. The success of Sierra Nevada, along with the contributions of New Albion and Anchor, paved the way for every other craft brewery in America today.
A completely different marketplace back when we first started. There was really only a couple small breweries that had opened up since Prohibition. And there were a lot of failures. Back when we started, the whole U.S. brewing industry only comprised about 35 companies that were left in business. after Prohibition. Maybe 800 breweries opened up, and they went out of business at a pretty rapid rate until I think 1978 or 79 was the low point in the industry. Then a handful of small breweries opened up, and all of those pretty much went out of business. So the breweries that were opening around the time we did, I think all of them are out of business today but one. And because of the challenges that those breweries had trying to produce a consistent beer.
Yeah, did that scare you at all? Thinking like, these are going out of business, that this might not be the right thing to get into?
I was in that first crop, so,
okay.
But what was a little disconcerting is the industry analysts were predicting that by the year 2000 there'd probably only be 2 companies left brewing beer in the United States. It was becoming somewhat of a commodity, and like milk, the branding was becoming less critical, and people were just ordering beer. Things have turned around significantly. I mean, today we've got almost 1,500 breweries operating again in the United States. A huge amount of diversity, actually much more diversity than we had probably after Prohibition. There's a lot more styles, a lot more innovation happening in our industry today. It's been a tremendous amount of passion that's gone into it, and I think that I've got a lot of rewards from what we've accomplished, not just me, but all of us here in the company.
So with all this talk about beer and its history, time now to tell you about why there's more than just one flavor. Heavy. In its most basic form, beer is simply a mix of barley, hops, yeast, and water. All right, when it comes to flavor, the variety of barley matters, whether it's 2 or 6 row. And then where the barley was grown and when it was sown matters. And before grain can be fermented, it has to be turned into malt, which is the process of steeping grain in water, allowing it to partially germinate and then drying it with hot air. Now, moisture, temperature, and time determine whether it's going to be a Vienna, Pilsner, chocolate, or other kind of malt. And of course, a brewer could use more than one kind. Then come the hops, the seasoning of beer, where the hops were grown along with the variety, whether it's Mount Hood, Golding, Cascade, and the time and length in which they were added, all affect flavor. And of course, the brewer could use more than one type. Then there are different strains of yeast used to ferment beer. That drastically affects flavor. Top fermenting yeasts are used to create ales like pale, hefeweizen, porter, and stout. Bottom fermenting yeasts are used to create lagers like American lager, Pilsner, and Bock. Water quality of course matters, and then the brewing process definitely affects flavor. There's steeping, germinating, kilning, milling, lautering, wort boiling, and settling, cooling, yeast input, pitching, primary and secondary fermentation, chill proofing, blending, filtration, and finally, bottling. Now, time and temperature at every step of that process will affect taste. And now you know why all beer doesn't taste the same. Okay, here's a part of the show that I love. It's called 3 to Try Before You Die. Here's how it works. You, the viewer, get a chance to vote on your favorite beers from a specific area. This week, we're going with Sacramento. And these gentlemen right here have chosen their favorite beers. We'll start with Rick Sellers, Jay Brooks, and J.J. Jackson. Gentlemen, we'll get to you guys in just a couple of seconds. In the meantime, let's take a look at the history, that is the beer history of Sacramento, way before the microbreweries. Right next to Sacramento's American River sits the Campus Commons Golf Course. But in the late 1800s, this was all hop fields, and it belonged to Emil Clemens Horst, who at one time owned the largest number of hop acres in the world. It's said that Horst revolutionized the hop industry by inventing a mechanical separator that kept the hop intact while removing the vines and leaves. Today, the majority of American hops are grown in Oregon and Washington, but in California's Slough House, there's still one artifact standing that represents the region's long beer history. And in downtown Sacramento, on the corner of 9th and J, stands another icon of beer history, the Roostaller Building. This was the business headquarters and tap room for the Buffalo Brewing Company, which for a long time was the largest brewery west of the Mississippi, and from 1890 until Prohibition, Buffalo was considered the beer of the West Coast. And you could even say beer brought baseball to Sacramento. One of the city's first professional teams was named the Gilt Edge after Roostaller's brand of beer. And one of the city's first ballparks was built just outside of the city limits so they could sell what else? Beer. So as we know, beer has a long history. What you might not know is how beer played a role in actually keeping people alive during the plague. Because of its carbon dioxide, alcohol, and low pH, bacteria that are harmful to humans cannot grow in beer. But there are things that can harm the flavor. And that's one reason why you have the beer scientist. Oh yeah, in case you didn't know, you could get your PhD here at UC Davis in beer. Well, food microbiology and fermentation, but still beer. They're also famous for their short courses in brewing. And you could argue that UC Davis is not only the most prestigious beer school in the country, but they're also responsible for many of the minds behind the American craft beer revolution. So Charlie, tell me, what makes the program here at UC Davis so unique?
Years of history training brewers for jobs in large companies and small companies, and a lot of experience in the brewing industry that we can deliver to the students. It's a very complicated science. It goes into malting and brewing, and at the end of the day they design their own brews, they brew them here in this wonderful new pilot plant, and then they can celebrate them.
Now don't get me wrong, this all sounds very interesting, but when I was in college it was more sampling the beer as opposed to making it, so it's all kind of new to me.
Well, sampling is important. There's a lot of people enjoy it, and so they should, but of course never abuse it.
Brewery studies here at UC Davis all started in 1959 as an offshoot of the wine studies department. Today, many of the students are working on ways to solve why beer goes bad. Remember, consistency is the key to any good brewer, and keeping the flavor during the brewing process is what it's all about. Jonathan, what can go wrong during this brewing process?
Well, because you have natural raw materials, and these raw materials vary from season to season, brewers are always having to adjust the ratios, the times, the temperatures, the pHs of the process. That way you get a consistent product. Also, brewers are very concerned with introduction of oxygen after primary fermentation has begun, because oxygen is the enemy of fresh, consistent beer.
Okay. Have you ever gotten dizzy looking at this?
No, not really.
When it comes to beer going bad, many things are out of the consumer's hands, but some things aren't. Beer can go bad in a hurry. One way is from being light struck. This happens when the oils and the hops react to various wavelengths of light. In a light beer bottle, it can happen in a few seconds. A dark bottle, a few minutes. So let's say you're having a party and you can't fit all the beer in the cooler. Well, in the time it takes you to eat your burger, good beer goes bad. Now, the flavor of the beer can also be ruined by oxidation. You know, oxygen reacting with the compounds in the beer, and heat and motion speeds this up. So if you buy a case of good beer, the worst place to keep it is in your hot garage. In that environment, it'll be bad in weeks. So it sounds like there's a lot of things that can go wrong with beer, but there is a lot of good behind beer as well. A lot of people out there discuss the benefits of wine. You actually think beer is healthier. Tell us why.
Oh, I know it's healthier. The key ingredient in any alcoholic beverage that cuts down the risk of your arteries from blocking is alcohol. And it really doesn't matter if that's red wine, white wine, beer, or anything else in the same equivalent quantities. So beer actually has the same benefit as wine to cut down the risk of your blood vessels from clotting. But there's more, you see, because beer at the same equivalent quantities of alcohol contains more nutrition. Beer contains some antioxidants, beer contains B vitamins, and beer contains silica. Beer and bananas are two richest sources in the diet. So beer actually is better for you.
Okay, and of course all in moderation. You don't want to sit there and...
In total moderation. A couple of beers a day, nectar.
Charlie's right, fine nectar. All right, we've almost reached the end of the show, and time now to reveal not only beers that are good for you, but some of the best here in Sacramento. These gentlemen have chosen their favorites, and we'll start right here, of course, with Rick, and tell us what you chose.
I chose the Rubicon IPA. When the Great American Beer Fest introduced the style as an official category, this beer won the first 2 years, in 1989 and 1990. I love the balance it has. It begins with a nice bready malt character, and then the citrusy, floral, and spicy hops that come in. It's a really nice, lightly spiced ale.
And Jay, how about you? What'd you choose?
I chose the Imperial Russian Stout from Sacramento Brewing Company. I really like this style of beer. It was originally made in England, and they made it very hoppy and very strong in order to send to the Baltics and to Russia and to survive the journey. Supposedly it was a favorite of the Russian imperial court, and that's where it takes its name from today. It gets this beautiful black color from roasted malt, which gives it these wonderful coffee and chocolate notes, occasionally some caramel, and then you'll get some sort of dark fruit from it, plums and prunes and raisins sometimes. And you wouldn't think of this beer as a summer beer, and I wouldn't have it out to mow the lawn, but inside it's a wonderful food beer, and it goes, the roasted flavors really pick up and complement with say, steak and meat, and the caramelized flavors in a lot of those kind of dishes are also in the beer, so they complement each other wonderful.
JJ, and what'd you choose?
I chose Sudra Pilsner. It's a Bavarian style, very refreshing. I know that they use classic hops in this, noble hops, the Hirschberger from Hallertau and the Mittelpunkt from Hallertau, and also Tettnanger. And it's a very well-balanced beer, and it's brewed on actual German brewing equipment. It's imported in Davis, and it's a very good example of this style. It's very refreshing, nice for a summer beer, but I wouldn't call this a lawnmower beer.
Not a lawnmower beer.
No.
All right, and this is for all you guys. How do you think the local brewery scene has changed over the years?
Well, I think it's really matured. 10, 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to find beers that were defective and didn't taste very good. But the craft industry has really come a long way, and it's hard now to find a bad beer.
20 years ago, there was one brand, and same with bread. You know, no longer just have one plain white bread. You have artisanal bread.
Lots of artisan bread.
And brewers are the same way. We've learned a lot. The consumers demand more, and we're being delivered more from our local breweries. It's a great thing.
Yeah, I think the food angle has really helped step that up in the last year or two. A lot of people, more chefs and restaurants, have discovered just how well beer and food go together. And the spiciness of the hops really works with a lot of spicy dishes in a way that wine just really can't compete.
It's more difficult to go along and make a consistent beer product than it is to go along. And wine is, nature makes wine. It takes a civilization to make beer.
All right, my glass is empty. If you'd like to join me for round two, head over to our website at kvie.org/viewfinder. Vote for your favorite beer and also learn more about this fine, tasty beverage. Until then, I'm Gary Gelfand. Cheers. Hey, I need another beer. Another one.
To order a DVD copy of this program, call 888-814-3923 or visit kvie.org/viewfinder.